when a not-for-profit hospital like St. Vincent's Hospital closes, there are all sorts of laws, like not-for-profit laws, that say a private corporation can't just reach in and take a not-for-profit and basically turn it into private luxury condos. You have to continue the corporate mission, and you have to give back to the community. There has to be an exchange for that, and it can't just be a monetized exchange like, hey, it's $300 million from the bankruptcy court. When we got involved, we immediately went into state court to try to stop it, there's like Article 28 of the New York state laws basically say that if you're going to shut down a hospital, there are all sorts of things that you have to do to protect healthcare, to advise patients, to give notice, none of which happened. And literally this 160-year institution was shut down in 14 days. And by the time we got to it, we couldn't ever get in front of that court. When we went in front of the state court judge, the judge was very receptive, echoed our sentiments about needing the hospital to stay open. The problem was they had already filed in bankruptcy court, so we got transferred into a bankruptcy court judge whose goal had nothing to do with public health. In fact, the first words out of my mouth when I was in front of her was, "Your Honor, there's an emerging health crisis on the Lower West Side of Manhattan," and her response literally was, "Counselor, that's not my concern." While she simultaneously demanded that we bring any complaints in front of her, saying that she was going to retain all jurisdiction on all matters, at the same time basically told us she wasn't at all concerned about healthcare interests. And this was literally, and to some degree, it kind of makes sense in so much as a bankruptcy court's job is to liquidate assets. Again, we've taken it out of the humanistic or humane aspects that Katie was talking about, and we put it into this totally monetized environment where it's just dollars and cents. And in some ways, that was the most honest thing that happened in all of the weird unanswered questions and dishonesty that we've been confronted with. I think it comes down to this basic premise, like, do you accept the premise that everyone is entitled to health care, or don't you? Like, is that a fundamental right? Because I think from that flows the rest of all of these conversations. If you don't think that people deserve health care, then women should have to pay more than men, because statistically maybe it shows that women spend more money in healthcare, or maybe you should have private hospitals, and maybe the Upper East Side of New York, where there are lots of rich people, those folks are entitled to a different type of healthcare than the rest of us are entitled, right? If you really think that healthcare isn't a human right, isn't a basic fundamental right, then like all of this assault on our healthcare kind of makes sense. And I think that you get into a situation where, you know, is free market the way that healthcare should be determined? And I would vehemently say no, right? As I'm saying that to you, it's absurd to us as we sit in this room, and I even asked that question, but that is really the question that's at play here. When we talk about the changing face of healthcare, what we're really talking about is, again, to tie it into this kind of Occupy movement and this discussion about privatizing. And why that's so important is because, you know, it is probably the most dangerous conflation of privatizing something. And before this, we saw, you know, 5-10 years ago, we were all talking about the subprime mortgage scandals, right? And there was a couple of great movies about how the financial collapse was directly tied to these horrible predatory lending schemes that were happening. Well, as Katie said, you know, $450 billion, or whatever the number is, billions of dollars are set to be put into healthcare because of some of the changes that have happened. And how do we not end up just creating another predatory financial opportunity? And now it's not just our homes, which is bad enough, but now it's our lives and our bodies. And you know, I think that that's kind of a backdrop to it. And as these hospitals close in all of our neighborhoods, and we hear this narrative of like, well, you know, the changing face of healthcare and technology today, people have shorter stays in hospitals. Well, all of that is true, but again, are we integrating that with an interest in how we promote health and healthcare, or are we using that as a pretext to shut down hospitals? Because if you step back and look at it, as I think Katie said, you know, the Lower West Side of Manhattan has no hospital beds. The Upper East Side has thousands and thousands and thousands. It's not that we don't want the Upper East Side to have thousands and thousands, but what we're seeing is that the haphazard way that healthcare finds its way to us, you know, is being directed by market forces. And I could even say maybe it's not so haphazard. And in fact, are we in a society in this country where there are two tiers of healthcare? Healthcare for the rich and healthcare for the poor, right? And so what emerges when these hospitals close in our neighborhoods are urgent care centers, and you hear more and more of them. And I think that we did have a couple of victories. First of all, there was this very choreographed thing that was supposed to happen. There was supposed to be this narrative was supposed to say, gee, everyone wants a hospital, but the changing face of healthcare, and it's so hard to run hospitals, and it's so expensive. And we basically just peeled that back and showed that hundreds of millions of dollars were wasted, and in fact, the hospital never needed to close for financial reasons. Then people were supposed to swoop in and give us a 24-hour urgent care center. We're supposed to be so thankful because we're in the middle of this emergency, and everyone would applaud and move on, and it would be business as usual. And the community totally did not buy that, and absolutely changed that narrative. I remember one of the first marches when we were orchestrated by all the political powers, and we were supposed to march down the street and say, what do we need? Emergency services, when do we need it now? And they said, what do we need? And the community said, a hospital! And when do we need it now? And it never changed. So one of the first victories is that, like, what a beautiful community I live in, and what a beautiful group of people who've come together against all odds, and I make this comparison without trying to diminish in any way the intense horrors that Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans experienced, because in some ways there's no comparison. But in another way, I make that comparison of it's kind of like, in fact, the ER head of Bellevue compared this to it was the Katrina of New York. And in some ways, I think that that's true, because it was an entire community in a life and death situation where those who were in positions of power were supposed to protect us simply turned their back and let it happen. And I think one victory is that the community really came together. We have this coalition of 8,000 people, and I think that we have made clear that this narrative is about healthcare. The second thing is that we have moved forward, and we're continuing to fight. If we can get a 2-bed hospital, we can get a 20-bed hospital. If we can get a 20-bed hospital, we can get a 200-bed hospital or a 300-bed hospital, and it can at least save lives in the immediate. And we have to fight that fight, even if they tell us it's a done deal. And I always say, sometimes the most important fights are the ones they tell you, don't you dare try to fight, and you can't do anything, right? And then I'm always interested in those fights. And the third victory, I think, is that to some degree it has slowed down or helped other hospitals that were set to be on the chopping block to be shut down. There's like 8 or 9 hospitals that were set to be shut down, and I think that it's slowed that down, although I think there's a lot that we still have to do to stop that from happening. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as I started out by saying, I'll end by saying, do we believe that healthcare is a fundamental right, that if anything happened to any one of us, we should be able to walk into a hospital and get treatment free of our religious persuasion, free of our gender, free of our ability to pay, free of whatever it is, that we're able to do that. And I think many of us, I'm 44 next week, I think many of us are in a generation where, in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s and the 90s even, we grew up with that deep understanding that, of course, we can walk into a hospital and we can get care. But what I'm saying is that if we don't really understand this financial manipulation and maneuverings and the political backdrop to it, it's literally something that we could be in a society, in a country where, in fact, our children or our children's children can't walk into a hospital. And there may not be a hospital there, and they may not have the right kind of insurance to get the health care that they deserve. So that's something that we really have to think about. So with that, I'll turn it over if people have comments or questions or just want to say something. Yeah.